Hi, I'm Kathy Ford. I'm Luke Ford's mum. I'd just like to tell you a little bit about Luke. He was a normal, healthy, happy little boy who loved sport. But when he was about 6, a few little things happened which we didn't think much of at the time. Luke played soccer for Chullora Wolves, and he was playing soccer this one day, and he came off crying in the middle of the game and said he was worried about his heart. I ended up taking him to the local doctor, and I said, look, I want a referral to a cardiologist to get Luke checked out. And he said, look, he's a normal, healthy young man. There is nothing wrong with him. I said, yes, but I want Luke to know there is nothing wrong with him. We ended up taking him to a cardiologist at Bankstown. The cardiologist did echocardiograms and a stress test. And when the results came back, it came back that he was 93% fit. He couldn't get much fitter if he tried.
The Fords always lived across the road from the church, so whenever there was a burning car or something left in the church driveway, they'd be the one to call the police and let us know. So it was really cool when Luke and his sister Alana started coming to the church.
And we just started coming across here because there was a big open concrete, and we liked to roll around on rollerblades and skateboard and that sort of thing.
The first time I remember meeting Luke was at school. He was a young teenager and he liked to come over to the school and ride his skateboard. And the most important thing I remember about Luke was that he had the most brilliantly white board shorts. And I'd comment to him each afternoon, your mum washes really well.
He's one of the coolest guys I've met, skatey, not afraid to do adventurous things.
All the boys at church and him would always be going off to do something crazy after church.
Skateboarding and bodyboarding and
just hanging out, talking smack.
We had a thing where we'd go to the beach and a group of us would just sort of jump off sand dunes, sort of just basically try and get hurt. I mean, that was part of it. I suppose I had it as well, thinking that I was invincible, and I definitely thought Luke was. The stuff he'd do and just get up afterwards, and it was nothing to him.
I remember Luke always being active, always, when he sat in church, you'd think, is he going to stay there for long? Because he always just seemed to be, on a skateboard or running around, or, he was just so full of life.
Kind-hearted, he was really kind-hearted. Him and Sayers and his kids really welcomed me. I remember when I first came to church, they were the ones that kind of approached me and started talking to me. I remember that clearly.
He was a very nice young man, and he's grown into a lovely husband and father.
In March 2004, Sarah and I were married, so in love and ready to take on the world together. In the first few years of our marriage, I'd feel my heart beating abnormally. This triggered panic attacks as I thought something was wrong with my heart. I saw a cardiologist in Bankstown. He said it was nothing to worry about. In 2006, we became pregnant with Leah. Our family began to grow.
When Leah was 9 months old, she had what we now know was her first cardiac event. I was changing her nappy on the change table, and as I picked her up, I let her slip to the side and she bumped her rib on the table. I caught her mid-air, but it was then that I realised that she wasn't breathing. She was stiff and arching her back, and she was blue and grey.
We took her to a GP who referred us to a paediatrician who, after examining her, told us it was most likely breath holding, very common with young children. This diagnosis didn't seem right to us. Leah experienced 4 more events like this over the next 15 months. With life going well, it was time to have another baby, and we became pregnant again. Sarah became pregnant again, this time with Tyler. 2 weeks before my event, we attended our good friend's wedding. We had no idea what was about to happen. Life was good.
On the 21st of February 2009, our lives changed forever. On Saturday morning, Luke, who'd been watching cartoons with Leah, came into our room and said he was going to get a shower. So I got up and started sorting this massive pile of laundry that was in our room. I was 11 weeks pregnant at the time. About 5 minutes later, Leah came in and she said, "Daddy's being funny, Daddy fell down." I hesitated for a second. I thought, all right, I'll go check out what's going on. I walked around the corner and first saw Luke's feet. He was on the ground. I thought he was playing some crazy game with Lee. I spoke to him and looked at his face. I thought he was fitting. His breathing was very irregular and he was making an animal-like groan. His eyes were open but he couldn't respond. So I ran to the front door and screamed out to Kevin, who's my stepdad and he lives over the road. I got my phone and tried to call him, but I kept making a mistake with the numbers. Kevin came to the door and I went and got a towel and threw it over Luke and said to Kevin, "Do you think I should call an ambulance?" As I spoke to the call centre operator, he asked, "Is Luke breathing?" And I said yes. And then Kevin said no, he stopped breathing. Kevin didn't know CPR, but thanks to the movies, he was right in there, straight away breathing, doing compressions. The operator kept asking me questions about Luke and I just remember telling him, I need to pray for my husband. So I stopped him from talking and then I couldn't even form a prayer. I was just saying, "God, just be with Luke, just be with Luke." Okay, so we waited 18 minutes for the ambulance to arrive. After 10 minutes of them doing CPR and using the defibrillator and giving him needles, I just needed to walk outside. I called the pastor of my church and all I could say to him was, "Please just get the church to pray." By this time, Luke was grey and blue in colour, his eyes dilated and just staring. I remember looking at him being worked on with my mum and just saying to her, "Mum, he looks dead." And she just hugged me and said, "I know." 8 more minutes passed and I was just waiting for them to look at their watch and say, "Time of death." But they got a heart rhythm. And I remember asking them, should I grab some clothes for the hospital for Luke as he was still naked, and they just looked at each other with this look that I didn't understand at the time. They're just kind of pausing. I now know it's because they thought he was going to die and he wouldn't need any clothes, but they humoured me and said, "Yep, go get him clothes."
My husband and I were planning to go to a wedding at the Hunter Valley, and we'd packed the car and we're all excited about going away for the weekend when I got a call from Sarah to say that she was in a car following the ambulance to Bankstown Hospital with Luke in it, that he'd had a cardiac arrest, which we couldn't believe.
I was actually sitting in a hairdresser. I was getting my hair done. I had foils all in my hair and I got a text message, and when I looked at it, it was from Matt Keys. It's a really long message and it said that please pray for Luke Ford because his heart has stopped beating and he's been rushed to hospital. And I just went into sort of a state of shock. I didn't know what to do. I sort of stood up and the hairdresser was going, "You all right?" And I couldn't even talk. I got up out of there quickly. I had to get my hair washed out. I just wanted to go. I just wanted to leave straight away.
But before we went, Heath Wiley came to the door, knocked on the door and came in and spoke to us. And I'm forever grateful that he came in and asked could he pray for Luke with us. And I really did appreciate that, because I know in my own heart that God is the answer to it. He will decide whether Luke lives or dies. I mean, the hospital will try to help, but it's his decision in the end. And to have somebody come and pray with us, I'm not a churchgoer, but I am a believer. And to have Heath come and pray with us was comforting to us.
And then, raced out of there and raced to the hospital and sort of learnt exactly what was going on and realised it wasn't very good.
I followed the ambulance to Bankstown Hospital and was greeted by a social worker. The doctors and nurses kept saying, was he sick? Did he take drugs? It's okay, we just need to know. No one knew what was wrong with Luke and no one gave us any hope. Always saying he has a long way to go, he was down for a long time. His body needs to rest in order to recover and he won't wake up before Monday.
We weren't allowed in straight away, but when we did go in, Luke was laying there. He'd been put into a coma.
When they talk about someone being in a coma, I pictured someone peacefully sleeping in a bed. But Luke was shivering, jerking, he was covered in bags of ice from the servo. They used an experimental hypothermic therapy to try and cool the blood and reduce swelling to the brain. and therefore reducing the brain damage.
And I ended up going up to the hospital, and I just wandered around the grounds because I just wanted to be close to them, saying to God, look, we really, really want Luke back, but not if he's not going to be good. So I'm not really sure what I'm praying for, but please do something good. But please don't do it half-measured because we don't want him coming back and hating life.
Day 2. Upon arrival in the ICU, the intensive care unit manager, the nursing unit manager, and a nurse took Mum and I into a small room to talk. I thought this is just what happens when you have family in the ICU, but it was here that we got the facts. Luke had had a cardiac arrest. 90% of people who go into cardiac arrest before they reach hospital die. Out of the 10% who make it to the hospital, 8 will die and 2 will live. However, out of the 2 who lived, even if Luke did wake up because of his downtime, he would have significant brain damage. They told us it didn't look good, and by the end of the week we would have some hard decisions to make.
I remember just feeling the need to just come to the church. I needed to be here. And yeah, I think church started at 10 o'clock, and I just could not wait for church to start. I remember I came across here at about 9:30, and I ran into Heath, and I just started crying, and I could not stop crying, and him and Kylie ended up bringing me into the hall and sitting me on the lounge, and both of them sort of grabbed my hands and sat beside me, and just said a prayer, and that was really, really nice. I needed that.
We were informed on the Sunday morning during church service actually that Luke had an episode, had cardiac arrest, and that he was in hospital in a coma.
We knew that he'd been without oxygen to the brain for quite a while, and we knew that wasn't good, but we were hoping he'd be all right.
We'd actually just finished the service, and I was singing and my phone went off, so I raced out to answer it when I saw it was Sarah, and she said, he's gone, he's not coming back.
Debbie came down the aisle and came up the front, and I remember her doing that, and she stood up the front. She said, I've just had a call from Sarah to say that there's no brain function and that Luke's not going to survive, and they're talking about turning off the life support, which was absolutely devastating to hear that.
Not long before Luke's cardiac arrest, at church we had a time where there was a real moving of people wanting to get their lives back to the Lord, turning of hearts, souls, decision of the will back to the Lord. And Sarah had stepped forward the morning of church to say she wanted her life just to be holy for the Lord God. She wanted her family to be totally sold out for Jesus Christ. And we rejoiced with her. And then you can't believe how devastating it was for just a short time later for Luke to die. You could hardly believe that someone who had stepped forward and said, God, I want to trust you and love you, would have to face the death of their husband. One big fear I had was that Sarah would give up. She would say that all this stuff about Jesus Christ is a lie. But she never did. Once she put her heart and mind to the Lord, she kept going for him and trusting him with everything, no matter what happened. But we prayed. We prayed like we had never prayed before as a church.
And I remember being in a small group with a couple of other guys, and these big buffy burly blokes all huddled together, praying for Luke, praying that he'd come through, and just crying. There was nothing we could do, just let it come out. The emotion was so raw and so real.
I'd never prayed so hard for something that I felt was impossible. I knew God did amazing things, and I knew that he could heal and all that sort of thing, but I guess it felt funny asking for someone that I knew to be brought back to life when the chances were very, very slim.
I went out the back to the computer and my husband was sitting at the computer sobbing, and he just said, "I don't want to lose my son." I said, "No, none of us want to lose Luke." But I knew the only answer was to pray to God and ask him to save our son. He still had a lot of living to do. He had a beautiful wife, a gorgeous daughter, and he had another child on the way, and he still had a lot to do. But I knew that God would make the decision in the end.
The next day I went into my university, Wesley Institute, and into the choir class there. There were about 80 of us in that choir. And at the beginning of the choir I asked for a moment and had a chat with them and explained the situation to them. And I just asked if we could take a moment, if the choir could pray for Luke and his family. I was later informed that day through Facebook and emails and messages that Wesley Institute Choir had been going to their churches and their home groups and been asking them to pray as well. Must have had, just from that circle alone, must have had 1,000 people praying. It was unbelievable, just the number of people who were involved in it.
After it all happened, the officers spoke to each other, and the one who had been working on Luke said to him, "How come you got him back?" And the officer had said, who turned out to be a Christian, "Well, I was praying to the men upstairs and I was asking for Luke's life." So even there's a connection between Luke being brought before God during the whole event.
I think it was the next day after that they actually said, we just got to the hospital and we were waiting to go into ICU and the nurses wouldn't let us go in, and we were sort of like, is this bad? And they didn't want to say anything. They were just like, no, just give us a little bit. And so we were thinking the worst, obviously. And then they said, you can come in, he's awake.
I arrived to find Luke awake. He couldn't speak or control his eyes, but when he saw me, he reached out both his hands to touch my face and started to pull me in. The nurses said to me this was a miracle. They thought that he was going to die.
The phone rang and it was Nella saying that Luke had woken up. The miracle had happened, and I remember sort of just saying, "Oh, thank you," on the phone, hanging up, going to tell Mum, and on the way just sort of dropping to the floor. I just couldn't believe that God had granted the impossible, that this young man who had another baby on the way was brought back to life for nothing that he had done. It was a complete act of grace.
I was actually at uni on that day and ran back into a class that had most of the choir students in it, and got a bit of a glance from the teacher who wanted to know what was going on, and I explained the situation and said, my mate that you guys were all praying for that had cardiac arrest, well, he's come out of the coma and he's seen his wife and he's asked for her, he's spoken to her. Don't know the extent of any damage at the moment, but he's awake. And there's a real answer to prayer. And I remember this group of it's probably 40 or 50 students just cheering, like just erupting in applause and thanking God and praising God.
And so we just couldn't believe it. We went in there and he sort of couldn't look straight. And that's when, not long after that, they brought us into a room and they basically said to us, look, we can't say how good he's going to be, whether he's going to improve or anything like that. We weren't sure if that was going to be what Luke was like. One of the nurses wanted to know if he could recognise, any of his family members or anything. And one of the nurses asked him, do you know who this is? And he looked at me and he said, yeah, it's Bimbo. And we all the nurse looked absolutely horrified, like, who's Bimbo? And I burst into tears, and I just felt so happy that he actually remembered who I was and actually remembered my nickname as well.
I remember the day Luke came back to church after he'd recovered. I thought to myself, now don't stare at him because that'll make him feel uncomfortable. But I couldn't help it. I couldn't fill my eyes with him enough. I just had to look at him. I had to walk over and just touch him and say, "Hi, Luke," many times.
He wasn't running around on a skateboard, which was kind of unusual. But yeah, he just looked so normal, and so, yeah, I don't think I stopped crying that whole service.
I actually wasn't around when the cardiac arrest happened. But I think to me it was summed up about a year later when we're all at camping and just sharing stories about what happened. And I remember hearing all these stories and hearing all these stats and figures about how, you know, so many people don't come back from this and don't make it. And I remember just thinking, I just saw this guy do a backflip off of a bridge into the water about 3 hours ago. And I just couldn't believe, like, if someone told me, if that was my first time meeting him and someone told me what happened that day, I would have told them, I don't believe you. Because by God's grace, he's every bit the opposite of what you'd expect when you hear a story like that.
Luke still plays sport. Luke snowboards. He plays touch football. It's awesome.
We scoff at the Israelites that they, 3 days after being brought through the Red Sea and a great miracle happening, that they forget that and start complaining to God because they're hungry. I don't want that to happen to us. I don't want us to think, we're talking about this thing again. This is about God and His power, and I don't ever want to be accused of being like the Israelites and forgetting what God has done for us. I really enjoy this time where we can actually remember God, praise God for what He has done, worship Him for the grace that He gave to their family and to us as a church in answering our pleas to Him to perform the impossible.
And I know for Luke it has been a long journey, and I know for Sarah and the family it has been a long journey, but we know that God is faithful and that He will continue to be faithful to them, and we thank God for that as well.
I want to encourage your family and the church and the children to remember to be bold and to be courageous about your faith, and to really remember that God does give us days of life, and we must proclaim it and be bold enough to share the gospel of what God has done. And I know that He has done great things in your life, Luke, and He will continue to do so, and for our children.
Lukey, glad to see you alive and just being yourself. It's really cool. You are honestly a walking, talking miracle and a testimony to God, which is awesome. Yeah, much love.